alarm clock's shrill cry pierced through the darkness at 5:30 a.m., just like it had every morning for the past 3 years. Sarah's eyes opened reluctantly, her body protesting against another day of the grueling routine that had become her life. 2 jobs. 16-hour days. A cycle that left little room for anything else, including the luxury of feeling truly safe in her own home. At 28, Sarah had never imagined her life would look like this. Fresh out of college, she had dreams of a career that would fulfill her, maybe even make her happy. Instead, she found herself trapped in a web of financial necessity that demanded every ounce of her energy. Her morning job at the insurance company started at 7, and her evening shift at the restaurant didn't end until well past 10 at night. By the time she dragged herself through her front door each evening, she barely had enough energy to shower before collapsing into bed. The house itself was nothing special, a modest 2-story rental in a quiet neighborhood where the streets were lined with similar homes, each harboring their own stories of struggle and survival. Sarah had chosen it not for its charm, but for its affordability and the fact that it was close enough to both her jobs that she could make the commute work. The downstairs held a small living room, kitchen, and half bath, while upstairs housed her bedroom and a full bathroom. It was simple, functional, and most importantly, it was supposed to be hers alone. That particular October evening had been no different from countless others. Sarah's feet ached as she climbed the stairs to her bedroom, her mind already focused on the blessed relief of hot water washing away the day's exhaustion. The restaurant had been particularly busy, and she'd been on her feet for the entire shift, serving demanding customers who seemed oblivious to her fatigue. As she turned on the shower and waited for the water to warm, Sarah allowed herself a moment to breathe. These few minutes of transition between work and sleep were precious, the only time she truly had to herself. Steam began to fill the small bathroom as she undressed, looking forward to the simple pleasure of being clean and comfortable. But as she stepped under the hot spray, something made her pause. It was subtle, barely perceptible above the sound of rushing water, a soft creaking that seemed to come from just outside the bathroom door. Sarah stood still, water cascading over her shoulders as she strained to listen. The sound came again, a gentle settling that could have been the house adjusting to temperature changes, or the natural settling of an older building. Yet something about it felt different. Wrong, somehow. She quickly finished her shower, wrapping herself in a towel as she cracked open the bathroom door and peered into her bedroom. Everything appeared normal, her bed still unmade from that morning, clothes draped over the chair where she'd left them, the familiar shadows cast by the street light filtering through her blinds. But the feeling of unease lingered as she got dressed and settled into bed. Throughout that night, Sarah found herself waking at odd intervals. Each time, she was greeted by strange sounds that seemed to echo through the house, soft creaking, gentle footsteps, the whisper of movement that shouldn't have been there. She told herself it was exhaustion playing tricks on her mind, or perhaps the old house settling in ways she hadn't noticed before. After all, when you're only home for 8 hours a day, most of which are spent sleeping, how well do you really know the sounds your house makes? The next morning brought no relief from her demanding schedule, and Sarah pushed the previous night's disturbances to the back of her mind. Coffee became her lifeline as she struggled through another day that seemed to stretch endlessly before her. The insurance office was fluorescent lit tedium, processing claims and fielding calls from frustrated clients who took their anger out on whoever happened to answer the phone. By the time her shift ended, Sarah felt mentally drained. But there was no time to recover. She had barely enough time to grab a quick sandwich before starting her evening shift at the restaurant. When she finally returned home that second night, every muscle in her body screamed for rest. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step an effort, looking forward to nothing more than the sanctuary of her bed. But as she turned on the shower for the second night in a row, the sounds returned, movement just outside the bathroom door that made her skin crawl with an inexplicable sense of being watched. This time, Sarah was certain she heard something pass by the door. Not the random settling of wood and nails, but the deliberate sound of someone moving through her bedroom. Her heart began to race as she quickly rinsed the soap from her hair, her shower cut short by a growing sense of panic. Wrapped in her towel, she pressed her ear to the bathroom door, listening intently. Silence. But it was the kind of silence that feels heavy with presence, the absence of sound that screams louder than any noise. Sarah's hands trembled as she slowly turned the doorknob and stepped into her bedroom. Everything looked exactly as she'd left it, yet the air felt different somehow, disturbed, as if someone had just been there moments before. She dressed quickly and climbed into bed, but sleep remained elusive. Every sound, every shadow seemed magnified in the darkness. When she finally did drift off, it was into a restless sleep filled with half-formed dreams of being watched, of eyes in the darkness studying her every move. The third day passed in a haze of exhaustion and growing paranoia. Sarah's co-workers at both jobs commented on her appearance, the dark circles under her eyes, the way she seemed to jump at unexpected sounds. But how could she explain what she was experiencing without sounding crazy? How do you tell someone that you think your house is haunted by footsteps and shadows? That evening, as Sarah stood in her bedroom preparing for bed, she made a decision. She needed to know what was causing these disturbances, needed to prove to herself that it was all in her head. The rational part of her mind insisted that stress and exhaustion were creating phantom sounds, that her imagination was running wild due to sleep deprivation and the isolation of her demanding routine. But as she walked through the house that night, checking each room with the methodical thoroughness of someone trying to convince themselves they're being foolish, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. The living room felt too still, the kitchen too quiet. Even the familiar shadows seemed to hold secrets she didn't want to discover. She went to bed that night with her bedroom door firmly closed and a chair wedged under the handle, a precaution that felt both necessary and ridiculous. For hours, she lay awake listening to the house around her, every fiber of her being alert to the possibility of intrusion. When exhaustion finally claimed her, it was with the desperate hope that morning would bring clarity and the return of rational thought. Instead, she woke to a horror that would haunt her for years to come. It was well past midnight when Sarah's eyes snapped open, pulled from deep sleep by an instinct more ancient than conscious thought. The house was wrapped in absolute darkness, the kind of black that makes you question whether your eyes are even open. But she was instantly, completely awake, her body flooded with adrenaline in response to a danger she couldn't yet identify. And then she saw it. Beneath the crack of her bedroom door, a shadow moved. Not the random play of light and darkness she might have dismissed, but the deliberate movement of something, someone, passing slowly through the hallway just outside her room. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she watched the shadow pause, seeming to linger at her door as if listening, waiting, considering. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she was certain it could be heard throughout the house. Every muscle in her body tensed as the shadow continued its slow journey down the hallway, accompanied by the soft whisper of footsteps on carpet. Someone was in her house. Someone had been in her house, possibly for days, moving through her space while she slept just feet away. The realization hit her like a physical blow. All those nights of strange sounds, of feeling watched, of sensing a presence, her instincts had been right. While she'd been convincing herself it was stress and exhaustion, someone had been sharing her home, learning her routines, studying her life with the patience of a predator. Sarah lay frozen in her bed, afraid to move, afraid to breathe too loudly, afraid to do anything that might alert the intruder to her wakefulness. Through the thin walls of her bedroom, she could hear them moving through the house with a confidence that suggested intimate familiarity with the layout. They weren't stumbling in the dark or bumping into furniture, they knew exactly where they were going. Minutes passed like hours as Sarah listened to the intruder's unhurried exploration of her home. She could hear them in the living room, the kitchen, moving with the casual ease of someone who belonged there. The violation was complete and terrifying, not just of her space, but of her sense of safety, her belief that home meant sanctuary. When the footsteps began their return journey toward the stairs, Sarah knew she had to act. Her phone was on the nightstand beside her bed, but reaching for it would require movement that might give away her consciousness. Still, she had no choice. Moving with excruciating slowness, she extended her arm toward the phone, her fingers finally closing around the familiar device. As she brought the phone close to her chest to muffle its light, Sarah heard the footsteps pause at the bottom of the stairs. Her blood turned to ice as she realized the intruder was listening, possibly having heard some small sound of her movement. For several heartbeats, the house was absolutely silent. Two people, separated by walls and darkness, each aware of the other's presence. Then the footsteps resumed, this time climbing the stairs toward her bedroom. Sarah's fingers flew over her phone's screen as she dialed 911, her movements masked by the blood rushing in her ears. When the operator answered, Sarah could barely whisper her address and situation, terrified that even the quietest sound would alert the person now moving through the upstairs hallway. The footsteps stopped directly outside her bedroom door. Sarah pressed her face into her pillow, trying to muffle even the sound of her breathing as she waited for whatever would come next. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, predator and prey separated by nothing more than a thin wooden door and the chair sheet wedged beneath the handle. Then, without warning, the door handle turned. The chair held, creating a scraping sound that seemed deafeningly loud in the quiet house. Sarah heard a soft curse from the hallway, followed by what sounded like someone testing the strength of her makeshift barricade. But instead of forcing entry, the footsteps retreated, moving quickly back down the stairs. Through her window, Sarah could hear the distant sound of approaching sirens. Help was coming, but would it arrive in time? She listened as the intruder moved through the house below, no longer attempting stealth. There were sounds of drawers opening, objects being moved, as if they were searching for something specific before making their escape. When the police cars finally pulled into her driveway, their red and blue lights painting her bedroom walls in alternating colors, Sarah heard the back door of her house slam shut. The intruder was gone, vanished into the night like a nightmare dissolving at dawn. But the evidence of their presence remained, footprints in the dust, disturbed objects, and the terrible knowledge that her home had been violated in the most intimate way possible. The officers who responded were professional and thorough, but the investigation revealed a truth more chilling than Sarah could have imagined. Based on the evidence they found, food missing from her refrigerator, a depression in her living room couch that suggested regular use, personal items moved from where she'd left them, the intruder had been living in her house for at least a week, possibly longer. While Sarah worked her exhausting double shifts, while she slept upstairs in her bed, someone had been making themselves at home in her living space. They had eaten her food, used her furniture, and learned the intimate details of her daily routine. The officer explained that this type of intrusion, while rare, wasn't unheard of. Individuals who found ways to enter homes and live undetected, parasites feeding off the lives of unsuspecting victims. The most disturbing detail was the timing. The intruder's movements suggested they knew exactly when Sarah would be home and when she would be sleeping. They had studied her schedule with meticulous care, emerging from whatever hiding place they used during the day only when they were certain she was unconscious upstairs. The thought of being observed so closely, of having her most vulnerable moments witnessed by hostile eyes, made Sarah feel physically sick. In the days that followed, Sarah discovered more evidence of the violation. A window in her basement that had been carefully pried open and left unsecured, the intruder's likely point of entry. A small space behind her water heater where someone could have concealed themselves during the day, emerging only when the house was quiet and Sarah was asleep. Personal photographs that had been moved, suggesting the intruder had been studying not just her routine, but her life, her relationships, her history. The police investigation continued for weeks, but the intruder was never identified or caught. They had been careful to avoid leaving fingerprints, and the few footprints they'd left behind were from common shoes that could have belonged to anyone. Security cameras in the neighborhood had captured shadowy figures moving through backyards at odd hours, but nothing clear enough to provide identification. Sarah moved out of the house within days of the break-in, unable to spend another night in a space that no longer felt like home. She found a small apartment closer to the city, more expensive but with better security and neighbors close enough to hear if she called for help. The financial strain of the move added another layer of stress to her already overwhelming life, but the cost of staying felt far higher than the price of leaving. But the psychological impact lingered long after she changed addresses. Every night in her new apartment, Sarah found herself checking locks multiple times, listening for sounds that didn't belong, fighting the paranoid certainty that she was being watched. The violation of her most private space had shattered her sense of security in a way that couldn't be repaired by new locks or different walls. Sleep became elusive, and when it did come, it was haunted by dreams of eyes in the darkness, of someone moving through her space while she lay helpless and unaware. She installed multiple security devices in her new home: cameras, motion sensors, reinforced locks, but no amount of technology could restore the peace of mind that had been stolen along with her sense of safety. The questions haunted her most of all. Who had chosen her as a victim, and why? Had they been watching her before they invaded her home, studying her routine from the outside before finding a way in? What had they been planning to do if she hadn't discovered them when she did? The thought of how vulnerable she'd been, night after night, sleeping peacefully while a stranger moved through her house, made her question everything she believed about her own security and judgment. Sarah's story serves as a chilling reminder that the greatest horrors aren't always supernatural. Sometimes they're devastatingly human. In a world where we assume our homes are sanctuaries, where we trust that locked doors provide protection, the reality of someone violating that trust so completely is almost too terrible to contemplate. The knowledge that someone can live parallel to your life, sharing your space while remaining invisible, transforms the very concept of home from sanctuary to stage, where every private moment becomes a potential performance for hostile, hidden eyes. For Sarah, the house on that quiet street became a symbol not of independence and security, but of how quickly safety can become illusion, and how the most ordinary spaces can harbor the most extraordinary terrors. The intruder may have vanished into the night, but the violation they committed continues to echo through every quiet evening, every locked door, every moment when the familiar sounds of home seem just slightly off, carrying the whisper of a presence that shouldn't be there. In the end, the most terrifying aspect of Sarah's experience wasn't the break-in itself, but the realization of how long it had been happening without her knowledge. In our age of constant connectivity and surveillance, the idea that someone can become invisible in plain sight, living like a ghost in the margins of another person's life, reminds us that some of the most profound violations happen not with violence or drama, but with the quiet patience of a predator who understands that the greatest power comes from remaining unseen. The shadow beneath Sarah's door that night was more than just an intruder. It was the physical manifestation of every person's deepest fear about the spaces we call home, the terrifying possibility that our most private moments are never truly private, and that safety is sometimes nothing more than a comforting illusion waiting to be shattered by the turn of a door handle in the dark.